Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Day One Cricket Podcast. Today, I've got a guest who I wanted to speak to for a long time. He's an excellent journalist, written lots of great articles. I'll link a few down the bio in the bio, should I say? One was actually on the wobble ball, so I've really enjoyed that. I think it's fascinating to actually understand how that came about, and it really does give a good insight. And then also, he's written numerous books, Crickonomics, and the one which I've got right in front of me, History of Test Cricket, which I would recommend everyone go out and buy. But I guess before we go into details of cricket and the book, Tim, maybe give us a bit of an introduction about yourself, what you do and where you work, etc.
Yeah. Hi, Turan. Thanks for having me. And apologies. It's taken a few months now. So thank you very much. I'm a journalist for the Daily Telegraph and author of a few books. Sort of like to look fairly deep at sport and get stuck in. And I suppose the new book, which was quite a monster project, 5 years from inception to finishing, was the history of Test cricket.
Good. So I guess before we get into that book, how did you actually get into journalism? When did you start enjoying cricket? And then how did you merge those two together into a career?
Yeah, so I know, journalism is a funny one because sort of a few people do get on grad schemes stuff. I didn't. So everyone kind of makes their own path. It's quite kind of, everyone is different. It's quite chaotic, but you kind of need luck, you need persistence and hard work. And so I didn't study journalism or anything, studied history and politics, but then I sort of at the same time I was writing and doing work experience and also just kind of being persistent and maybe too persistent at times in terms of emailing people and stuff, and begun to freelance for ESPN, Cricinfo, and then kind of snowballed from there. But it was quite tough then, to be honest, but I think it probably has got tougher for freelancers. But the good thing about being freelance for quite a while is you do learn to be very self-sufficient, kind of generate your own ideas and stuff, which is actually really good things to have, because actually more and more, and especially actually now, kind of modern journalism, it's definitely, the old school thing was like you might have a similar piece in lots of different papers. Now it's very much kind of moved away to having something that's distinct, like unique offering. Actually being freelance before was kind of, you don't get commission unless you have a thing that's different, because if you're going to the same press conference as everybody else, it won't be a different piece, so no one's going to ask you to write it. And so in a sense, that was quite a good experience. And I spent a lot of time looking at things that I think were a little bit underreported. T20 cricket and associate cricket and the ICC were kind of really big things, all of which I felt were important and were kind of growing. And also it's also just like, I guess the guys who are covering England or whatever full time, there wasn't necessarily bandwidth for them to do that. So actually by not covering, and at the time I was able to actually have a think of, about what are other things going on. And I did a book on T20 cricket in 2019 with Freddie Wild, which was, really, really kind of a good thing to do, actually. A lot of work, but felt like it was bringing together a lot of different ideas and stuff.
Yeah, I definitely feel that in sort of one articles you read, you need to sort of go beyond what people are saying and figure out the why behind the saying those things. And I feel like some of the stuff I read from you, Mobile, for example, that actually goes behind what's actually happening in cricket, and it's quite interesting. So yeah, thanks for keeping it original and bringing those pieces to the wider audience. And thanks for giving us the introduction on yourself and how you got into journalism. I guess in terms of the book then, because we lost that, how did you get the idea for the book? What made you think there was a gap in the market, or was it just a confluence of various things that brought you to writing it?
Yeah, kind of combination. So I was actually weirdly in Sri Lanka in March 2020, so literally the day before I went home because of COVID. I had dinner with Simon Wilde, who wrote a very good history of England Test cricket came out 2018, and I was sort of saying, have you thought about doing this but for global Test cricket? And he basically said, you had to be mad to do that. And I thought, actually, maybe I am mad, kind of thing. The kind of, the basic idea was behind actually basically all my books is kind of wanting to read something, and it not actually being there. And I think if I wanted to read this book but it doesn't exist, that's a decent barometer that there'll be some interest in it. Then I was sort of looking at literature, and also I was aware kind of gently that the 150th anniversary is in March 2027. So that was just a little thing that was kind of in my mind. And I was like, that would be an obvious time, if not earlier, but there's another time. And I sort of looked, and there's been lots of great histories of countries, of players, of series, lots of kind of wisdom anthology type stuff, lots of statistical books. But there hadn't really been, we know with Jared Kimber, he will tell us there has been a book, and that's true. There was. He wrote a good history of Test cricket 2015, but again, that's 10 years ago now, so quite a while ago, and obviously very sort of different style to me. So I was actually like, there is something here that brings together all the kind of narratives from around the world, but very much want to be a book about story, the players, matches, stories, politics that have shaped the game. A book that you ideally, I think, is best read from start to finish, because hopefully it's got like a narrative thrust, even though obviously you can dip into bits if you prefer, but like that was very much the idea, and I kind of got really into it and really excited by it. I ended up getting a year extension, which was very good to do, because it meant I could kind of do the best book I could do, and yeah, I think and the research was pretty arduous. I think bibliography over 300 books, which over 40 people, talked to some of the very greatest players of all time, people like Margaret Holding, Sachin Tendulkar, and Chappell, and so on. So I talked to some incredible greats, and actually got a sense from them of I guess almost their reverence for the story. Like, they're so proud to be part of this story that's bigger than them. It's not to say that they kind of necessarily deeply understand the history, but kind of intuitively they do feel they're part of a bigger thing than them. And you even have that with things like the numbers on each cap. You're the 300th player to play for Australia, or whatever. And there is a sense of being part of this amazing institution. And I think the players really do have a respect for that, which that came across. And it was in a way, I think I probably have ended up a little more optimistic about the future of Test cricket than I have at the start of the project as well.
If you ever interview Ross and Chase, then I'm sure he'll change your mind. But no, definitely, I got that when reading the book, that it's something where it gives you a lot of items to think about that you haven't thought about before, because you never really think about how Test cricket evolved. And it's sort of, Test cricket is so new that you can actually piece together how it started from the beginning to how you get to actually Test cricket being played. So I guess the thing that was fascinating for me was actually, how did things and games become Test matches? Because you do explain it in quite a lot of detail in the book, but maybe you sort of delve into that and the history of what actually constitutes Test match and why they are Test matches.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because you think of the just the slogan of Test matches, and that the kind of reverence to that, and that we are attached to that, and the idea that you can't ruin the sanctity of Test cricket by giving Ireland or Afghanistan Test days or whatever it is now. But then kind of going back, it was so fascinating and really interesting. So basically, the slogan of Test is like a marketing slogan that's used, because the 1860s, 1870s, you get these basically private for profit tours from English teams to Australia or vice versa, and these tours are basically the players will pull together, almost like make a little company together, basically, and they will share the profits. Which is why when England go to Australia, 1877, for what's the first Test match, well, what's judged as the first Test match, they only have, so they go to Australia, New Zealand, and they only take 12 players with them, which means only one player's getting a rest each game. So it's just relentless. And of course, by the time they have the first Test match, one of their players is imprisoned in New Zealand, so they only have 11 players left to choose from. But it's crazy. You often have these you can have multiple England tours to Australia at the same time, each kind of claiming to be the England team versus the Australian team, and they're all playing these kind of parallel matches. So it's very peculiar. And you have the 1890s Australian journalist, as Moody, he retrospectively kind of goes back and says, I liked him, that's a Test match. I didn't like him, that's not a Test match, and so on. But it's still bizarre, because you have England go to South Africa, and England send basically D teams or E teams to try and make those games competitive, because if they send a full strength team, they'll just absolutely destroy South Africa. And yet these games are still given as Test matches. So it's very odd. And of course, you have 1930s as well. The funny stories, you have England play simultaneously Test matches in New Zealand and West Indies, and for 2 hours they're on the pitch in these two Test matches at the same time. When you think of the idea of a Test match is it's your best 11 players, well, that's obviously impossible to have those in two different places at once. So the history is very kind of peculiar, and it's odd how that's kind of been a little bit forgotten from the story of Test cricket, that we think of it was always this high status thing. Actually, the players just didn't know what was a Test match. So with W.G. Grace, the great player of his day, he only plays in 2 of the first 13 Test matches, which are all played by England, but he only plays in 2 of those because he would have known what was a Test match. He might not have been offered enough to play in these matches. He might not want to tour, all these things, actually. And they're given as Test matches. So it's just very idiosyncratic the way it starts, which is kind of in keeping with a lot of how Test cricket evolves. It's very kind of ad hoc way.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. And I think it's funny when you look at modern day Test cricket and everyone says, or all the older players say, you should want to play Test match cricket for what it means. And then you look at the beginning of Test cricket and everyone was trying to make money. That's why they're only touring with 12 players, because they don't want to share the pie out.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the amazing thing is actually players earn more. So I think Australian players earn more in the 1890s than they do until 1990s in real terms. So it's amazing. Like, yeah, the kind of like kind of the establishment kind of takes more control slightly later, but the early years, actually the players do have a big say.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. So then after that, I guess you just had England and Australia really playing against each other. How did South Africa come into the fold? That was something that you draw in the book, is it? Just I think they went over and toured, but
Yeah, so South Africa is, so there's obviously a lot of kind of Anglo-South Africans who are involved in the mines and everything in South Africa. That is a big factor in putting cricket into South Africa. But then you have Abe Bailey, who's this, South African mining magnate, but he's also very close to the British establishment. So one of his sons marries one of Churchill's, his daughters. He's so intertwined with the establishment. He names his son Cecil after Cecil Rhodes. He's and he basically uses cricket as a tool to draw to strengthen ties among the empire. You'd be South Africa and England and then Australia as well. And he ultimately leads to the first ICC being formed in 1909. The key word there is imperial. So if you're not part of the British Empire, you can't be part of that. And this means USA and Argentina, where cricket is strong, they're excluded. And this is a great sliding doors moment, because if you have a world where you have USA and Argentina playing test matches, potentially the whole geography of test cricket looks different, because not only those two countries in themselves, but they would probably in future, but that Canada and stuff, I suspect, would have come in event, cricket, recent history in Canada. And again, if you had US playing, I suspect Canada would have as well. And you get a whole different, it becomes a bigger, more global sport, doesn't have these exclusionary attitudes. And yeah, the whole fabric is different. So this is really almost the big kind of what if, the fork in the road for as early as 1909, which is odd to say, but then, but yeah, you look at actually Argentina, there was, cricket reports and scorecards in Spanish language newspapers and stuff. Yes, people talk about the British influence in Argentina and the cricket, which is a huge, a huge factor, but it's also spreading out of that. And then there comes a point when you tell countries they're not wanted, and they do kind of, they get the message, and they're kind of lost to the game. So it's quite sad actually, as someone who wants cricket to be played in more countries and really enjoys the variety. That was quite sad to realize that history.
yeah, for me, it was more if they, they obviously wanted it to be an Imperial Cricket Council, but if they'd actually thought about it, maybe from more global terms, and brought USA and Argentina in, it would have, we can be touring Buenos Aires or Philadelphia. But how did
Absolutely.
cricket get strong in those countries? Is it just British influence, or was it mainly other factors? Or
Well, so the history of cricket expanding is, British influence tends to be the catalyst, the historical catalyst, really. And that's generally been true. In fact, the only country that's not true who plays Test cricket is Afghanistan. So Afghanistan is the first country without a British influence, because Afghanistan's original cricket comes from Pakistan, really. So that's Afghanistan, a unique story amongst the 12 nations of Test. There's not an English influence there, really. But yeah, so I mean, cricket in Philadelphia is really, really strong, and I think there's over 100 clubs in the state, and they have Barty King, who's maybe the best, kind of, well, he's a sort of swing and seam bowler, but maybe the best bowler of his day, early 1900s, and does amazing in his tour to England, and they beat an strong Australian side and stuff. Yeah, it was like cricket was really big in Philadelphia. It wasn't particularly big elsewhere, but like the Philadelphia team alone was strong enough to be top 4, top 5 in the world, and yeah, probably stronger than the South Africa side at the same time. So it's very peculiar how this starts. And you obviously have the 20s, you have the big moment, and you get 3 new test nations, really in tandem: New Zealand, India, West Indies, and then you go from 3 to 6, and you begin slowly to get a more global test game.
yeah, I think it's interesting you say that, because you mentioned in the book that actually some matches between Argentina and USA were actually stronger than test matches played between England and South Africa, just for the factors you mentioned. So it's like, what actually constitutes a test match? And when people say that Afghanistan, Ireland should play test cricket, it's like, well, you've always had these mismatches in test cricket. It's not something that's new. It's something that's existed in the history.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just an odd, the history's very, and I suppose there's always this attitude of, so-and-so's ruining the stats and everything. It's just a curious, this sort of, I don't know, it's sort of, on one hand, people want test cricket to be more popular. On the other hand, they like that it's not more popular, and they want to, exclude people. There's this very kind of the split personality of kind of test cricket fans and administrators. It's kind of always been there.
Yeah, it's difficult though, because people, they think test cricket is one thing, and then when you try and change it, they think it's too much. But I guess looking back early days of test cricket, there was 2 players who I really want to talk about. The first one was Victor Trumper, because how do you think he changed test cricket? Because he was sort of the first player in that golden age. So maybe talk a bit about what the golden age cricket was and how sort of Trumper fitted into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Trumper, he basically comes to, he's just the kind of quite dashing Australian batsman. He's very, very attacking, venturous. In 1900, and of course, you should think about just how he's presented, right? This is all well before helmets. And so without helmets, you kind of get more the sense of the personality of the batsman when they're at the crease. And that is part of him. And he's also basically like the first cricketer to be photographed real high quality. We just have the famous picture of him is from 1909, where he's jumping out to play a drive. This is it's an artificial photo net. He's doing it for the photograph. It's not during a game. But anyway, he becomes this great dashing figure. And in 1902 at Old Trafford, he becomes the first ever Test cricketer to score a century before lunch. And it's still only been done like 6 times in history. So it's a remarkably rare achievement. And he basically plays a very kind of cavalier style. He's very good on sticky wickets. So these are basically wet wickets where it's rain overnight and the ball is very hard to play. He's very good on these. And there's this amazing stat actually, which I think does help to convey some of him, and his kind of mystique, which is that in the history of Test cricket, he still scores faster per hour than any man in history, which is just incredible. So this is not his strike rate, which we don't have a perfect. It was about 67, but because the over rate is so much higher then, and he scores about 40 runs an hour, which is faster than anyone in history. And then you kind of think about the experience of a spectator of being at a game. You're not really counting. You kind of remember, great boundaries and stuff, but you're not really counting balls, and you absorb it over time. So you just think, in a 2-hour session, he's getting 80 runs on average. That's 240 runs in a day on average. It's incredible. So the kind of wow factor of watching him bat, and very attractive bats as well. So he is a kind of magnetic figure, and you kind of, there's almost so much myth to him that I was kind of wondering, was he a myth? And he's not really. He's a genuinely great bat. And also his average is, 33, but his average, that's in the context of a low scoring era. So he's an exceptional batsman. It's true that with Clem Hill, another Australian bat's the same. They basically average the same. In fact, Clem Hill averages slightly more against England, and yet Hill's kind of forgotten about. But I think that is because of the other facts. Trumper's, his aggression and his scoring rate and stuff, and a bit of romance, obviously, that he dies at 37. So he dies during World War One, but like nothing to do with the war. He dies at home, and yet it still kind of triggers this huge national mourning. And I think in Australia, I think the sense is that they're not just mourning Trumper, they're mourning that the golden age before the war. And I think that's right. So he is this great symbol of, a more innocent age, if you like, but an incredible actor, and one we still talk about today, and rightly so.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just like the fact that Grace sort of anointed him as a player that was the next in line. So obviously you think he's a great player. And then I think just the stories you read of him being the first one to play across the line, things like that, it makes you think that he was someone who changed Test cricket. And I think that's what makes players great players, whereas maybe a Clem Hill didn't do that. I guess another fascinating story from the old one is Gilbert Jessup. I mean, like, it's crazy how these players are played so long ago, yet still hold the record. I think even in the Bazwell era, his record still hasn't been beaten for the fastest 100. So how do you sort of square that off in your mind? Like, how do you think these records can exist given how Test cricket has evolved?
Well, I think the Jessup story is so special because he's not that great a player. He scores 1 century in Test cricket, and it happens to be the fastest ever batting a batsman. So there's a kind of magic there, and there's sort of sense that part of one of the things I loved about the book is the sense that you have these great performances, and yes, some of them are Brian Lara at Barbados 153, and it's just an all-time great player at the peak of his powers, and that is so special. But it's also very special when the kind of opposite happens, and you have a good player, but not really nearly of that level, to be honest, who has an all-time great performance. Yeah, and that's what you get from Jessup. Again, 92. It's the Test after Trumper, so it's incredible. If you could watch, one Test at 1902 is incredible. So you have the Trumper is in the 3-run Australia win. Jessup is in a 1-wicket England win at the Oval, back-to-back Tests. So an amazing 2 sequence of Tests, and really kind of the golden age of the golden age, if you like. But Jessup's very a kind of cavalier figure. He's called the Croucher. He gets low, and he has a completely uninhibited approach. And some of his first toss, he's getting, I think at one point he gets 300 and 3-4 out. He just is incredible feet, just so audacious. And at this point, remember, he's playing as, because he can bowl earlier, but by this point he's basically playing as a number 7, a specialist number 7. So we're kind of an amazing luxury pick. And of course he's an amateur as well. And there's a lot of this about how it's said a lot that amateurs play in a certain way, in terms of being more cavalier and stuff. And he comes and embodied this idea as well. He's a brilliant fielder, just a really magnetic cricketer. And the amazing thing is that, 5 years ago, he was kind of a dead figure in terms of, he'd ceased to be irrelevant. No one like who followed cricket semi-regularly, no one really knew anything about him. And now, because of Bazball and constantly having a go at his record and not quite getting there, he's in the news all the time. Someone actually wrote a book on him recently as well. But so you have a situation. I know, yeah, it's something magical that he was a kind of a dormant figure, and he's been brought to life. I actually talked to his granddaughter recently, which was quite a cool, very cool, and just she's a health official in Ireland, but it was she's aware that this, and she's kind of getting messages all the time saying his record's under threat again, but somehow it never seemed to break it. So that's very cool.
Not quite. Everyone's still chasing him, which is, it's kind of nice. It adds to sort of the romanticism of Test cricket for me, because you think all these years and still, even in, like, you think about how much Test cricket's evolved. I think in the book you talk like in detail about how pitches have evolved, how balls have evolved. DRS has changed cricket, and I guess anyone listening, if they want to go into that, then you buy the book, because it really does give you a detailed insight into all the things that have changed Test cricket. I guess in terms of your views on the book, what was the things that stood out to you in terms of people you spoke to, or stories that you heard that you didn't quite realize actually happened and made you actually think a lot more about cricket or what you were writing?
I mean, so one of the nuggets I found, which I still find so amazing, this was from kind of reading old books, kind of completely forgotten stories. 1960s in India are not a very good side. They beat New Zealand in a test, and the players are kind of like, what's going to happen? Are we going to get paid a bonus or whatever? In fact, their salary was 250 rupees. Their kind of match was 250 rupees for a test, but they'd won in 4 days and they were only paid 200 rupees on a per rata justification. So they were basically docked money for winning the test. So they'd be better off losing in 5 days than winning in 4. So that was absolutely kind of remarkable. And is a quite a good vignette in terms of, think of the money in Indian cricket now. But it does show that the contrast and the money really only comes in. In fact, until 1983, remember, India were paying Doordarshan, the broadcasters, they're paying them to show their own home matches, and you go from that to the multi-billion a year TV deals they have now. So it's an amazing contrast. So that was definitely something that just stuck in my mind, because it's like, actually it's just incredible at that contrast. And I mean, from a slightly macro perspective, but the story of India is kind of crazy in terms of until Kolkata 2001, which is the incredible win. When Dravid, Laxman, Harbhajan Singh combined to, beat Australia after their 2-7, following on 2-7-4 behind. Until then, India had won 5.6 tests for every 10 that they lost. So they're basically losing 2 tests for every 1 that they win. So like in history until then. So really like an also-ran team. And you go from that to what they've become. It's amazing that actually India was so underperforming for so long. There's a really odd, especially now when you kind of think of their rise as inevitable, and maybe it was. And to be honest, I kind of think, I look at that story and I think the story is almost, why were they so bad for so long rather than why they're so good now? But it's interesting to frame it in that way.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot now in Indian cricket where they don't pick from the major test match centres anymore. Anyone can come through, whereas before it was, you think there's a billion people, but actually you're picking probably from, 100 million, same size as England, I guess. So
not even that, because basically you get the team for long comprises middle class players in the top 5 or 6 cities in India. So not even the whole city, just people of a certain class in those cities. So you're right. I mean, that's the thing. India is deep in its talent pool so much. You're getting players from pretty much everywhere now. I mean, you don't get many players from very, very small villages, but you do get a lot from, in Indian terms, mid-sized towns and cities. That's been a huge shift. And you also get, and that's where the infrastructure has developed so much. And the other thing is the kind of eyes on players, I think, is really important. So, I talked with Raul Dravid, and he said, when you were growing up, the only thing that mattered was the kind of under-19 state selector. And if they didn't think you're good enough, then that's it. You've got no chances. Now you've got that. You've got all these private academies, which are really important. So the private academies, they're kind of for profit, but they're like American tennis academies, where they're for profit academies. They take a lot of people who pay, but they're also obviously always trying to offer scholarships, because they want to have players who they develop who go through their academies as well. So that's a really important source. Stuff like the India under 19s has become such a methodical process in terms of as a scouting network. But also you have not just the IPL, but you also have these state T20 leagues, which are all looking for talent. So basically you have, whereas before it was one set of eyes, now you have 4 or 5 sets of eyes. So if you're good enough, so much less chance of slipping through the cracks. And the other thing, with all the extra money in the game, even at domestic level, because before, actually amazing, you got a lot of very good Indian players. You have very good Indian state players often who'd retire in their mid-20s because they just didn't earn anything from the game. And they might have gone on to play for India in many cases, but or at least really improve the standard of domestic cricket, which is already really helping the Indian national team. But they were retiring early, and now they're not. So there's all these things that have come together. And I suppose also more recently, specifically, India have worked really hard and effectively at changing the pitches in domestic cricket. So really what they've done, they've kind of recognised that Indian spin will always be strong. So actually if we can make pretty pace bowling friendly conditions in domestic cricket, we're going to develop pace bowls, we're going to develop batsmen who can play against pace, and the spinners will sort of take care of themselves. And we've seen India become a real force in all conditions, including, beating Australia in consecutive series away, for example.
Yeah, and obviously we had the great Test series this summer. I mean,
Yeah.
you caught a lot of it. What were your overriding thoughts on the series? Do you think it was up there with '05?
I think '05 for me, it's still half a yard ahead. I mean, partly just the drama at the end was incredible, but you have, I don't know, if that had been, because India kind of can't win the series on the last day, it's a bit different. If that had been 2-2 going to the last day, and that last day is kind of 3-2 out of the way. It was a great series. Actually, it was odd because I thought the pitches were quite poor, and the greatness was in spite of the pitches, and even the ball was strange as well because it would offer a lot the first 30 overs, then offer nothing. So it was quite topsy-turvy cricket. So I thought it was a really good series, obviously, really compelling, and to be 25 days was really cool. But I thought it was all because it was almost hyper bowler friendly, hyper batting friendly, and kind of nothing in the middle. And so you had these very odd phases and extreme phases. No, it's terrific. But I think '05 was a little better for me. I mean, '05 is certainly up there with the best series. And we talked about 1902. I mean, the 60-61 Australia-West Indies series as well, which begins with the first tie test, and you have all these, Benno and Alan Davison and Wes Hall and Garfield Sobers and Frank Roy and everyone all coming together. So the greatness of the players, and also have the kind of the wider context, which I guess is twofold. You've had first Test cricket has been very boring in the 1950s, the slowest ever decade for run scoring, and this helps. It's the start. It doesn't change things overnight by any means, but it's the start of Test cricket getting out of that rut. And then you have the socio-political significance. Worrell's the first black captain with tenure of West Indies. And and it then ultimately leads to the number one side in the world. So you have those things all come together and it creates a really unbelievable series. So that would be one that's certainly up there for sure.
Yeah, so it's actually, I think you speak about it in the book about how rare it is for a test to be close. For a test match to be close is actually super rare. So that's why when you do get close test matches, especially 2 or 3 in a series, that's kind of what elevates it, because I don't remember the exact stats, but for a test to be won within sort of 50 runs doesn't really happen that often, I guess. Is there more that we can do to make test matches closer, do you think, to save test cricket? Is it just improving the standard? Or, do we need to even out the team somehow? Franchise test cricket? What do you think the solution is for that? Because I think people want to see closer test matches. No one really wants to see India beat West Indies and Ahmedabad in 3 days in front of 2 people.
No, the stat I've gone over it. So it's basically only 3% of matches are decided by a margin of fewer than 30 runs or 3 wickets or fewer. So, I mean, that's 1 in 33 games, right? You kind of have to absorb a lot of not that close matches to get those. I guess it's also true you can get, and the other thing you get quite a lot of kind of semi-great test matches where you might have, it's an absolute brilliant, 3.5, 4 days, and the team needs 200 and they're rolled for 100, and the end is not very close. But it's sort of like it's like a film where it was all brilliant and it falls apart the last 15, 20 minutes, but it kind of was still brilliant for most of it. There's also a weird sense that the greatest of those matches is kind of elevated by the ones you have to get through in between times, right? Because T20 is geared to be close, and I really like T20, but of course a close T20 doesn't have the sense of, oh my God, in terms of that close test series does, which is why, the idea of the England-India series with 25 days, it comes down to an hour on the last day, is just insane. But the whole point is, it's insane because it's rare, right? But there are obviously things we can do to make tests more competitive, and clearly it's ultimately about sharing the money around more. And the ICC, cricket is richer than ever before. It can do a lot more, share money around. ICC revenue should be shared more equally, which means India and Australia taking a haircut from that, because actually it's enlightened self-interest. You talk about West Indies, you want West Indies going to India or England, being competitive, attracting people on the ground and TV viewers for 4 or 5 days. That's actually better for everybody. So there comes a point where the bigger countries accepting a little bit less money is actually in their own interest as well. Teams should get a tour fee. So West Indies teams used to get about 20% of the home broadcasting rights when they toured. Now they get nothing. West Indies go to England, they get nothing. England then tours West Indies in return, but West Indies earn maybe 10% as much from hosting England as the other way around, just because of the economics. So those things all need to be addressed. I think windows for Test cricket, proper windows really should be brought in where you have no franchise cricket at the same time. Again, and that will make it easier for players to commit and play. Talk about a minimum wage Test cricket, which still hasn't happened, but where you'd guarantee players a certain amount of money. But ultimately, the way I see it is that T20 should be used to subsidize Test cricket to a bit. I know that sounds odd, but like, I think if you go to a T20 game, people are actually quite happy to think, a couple of quid of their match ticket is going to Test cricket because they kind of value cricket in all its different forms. And the other thing is that because the nature of Test cricket, actually, like, lots of really big fans of Test cricket might not really go, and they might also actually not even watch that much because a lot of it obviously happening midweek. They're at work. They might follow on a slide tower, they might follow on the radio, whatever. It's quite hard to monetize all these things, but that's not to say they're not big supporters of it. So I think there's a lot more that can be done. And also I think the Auto Championship is a brilliant concept, but it's just so confusing at the moment. So I'd like to really have it's sort of simplified. I do actually suggest, I won't give it away too much, but I do suggest a kind of format in the book, which actually involves everyone playing the same number of games, every series being 3 matches, 4-day test matches as well, which I know is controversial, playing each from Thursday to Sunday. And then everyone, it's 3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw. Very, very simple. Everyone can have that. Everyone can understand what's going on, basically, which you don't have at the moment. And then, big teams are free to play extra matches outside of that structure, but the kind of simple league table, everyone can understand. And also, we talked about how Test cricket evolves. Well, one thing we haven't really had in the history is knockout Test cricket. And then since the World Test Championship has come, turns out that's absolutely brilliant. So let's have more of that, and let's maybe have semi-finals and then the finals.
Yeah, and I think something I actually read from an article you wrote on football and the rise of sort of fantasy football. If you have sort of a format where it's, I know exactly how many games are going to be played against who, you can sort of do those things which are adjunct to cricket, and you can raise more interest. So
that's really good point as well. And even things like they have in the IPL, they have the purple cat, the orange cat. You can do all that stuff if everyone's playing the same amount, and it just builds stories, right? Rather than a sense of there's this kind of league that's kind of randomly wrapped
together
around
based on bilateral games. Yeah,
it's a real mess, isn't it? But it's I think it's a very good idea that's poorly executed. It's not a bad idea because the alternative, which was nothing before, was even worse.
Yeah, and that's also in your book. You do talk about another sort of sliding doors moment where I think there was a tri-series between England, Australia, and South Africa, but the weather that summer was terrible, and it was
1912. That's right. Yeah.
So I guess, do you think that as a sliding doors moment? Do you think if that was sort of successful that summer, potentially we would have seen more triangular tournaments, or is it tough to know?
No, potentially. So I mean, the weather that summer is just so bad, and also South Africa, who have been quite good in the previous few years, are also they're pretty poor by that time. So it's a combination of facts that it becomes a complete slog, and you have the counties are furious. So these matches are all 3 days, which is inherently not very satisfying either. So potentially, actually, if that had gone really well, we might have had that structured competition might have become quite common in Test cricket, which would have been an interesting dimension. And we only get the Asia World Test Championship launched in 1999, I think, as a next attempt, 87 years later, which is, crazy, really. But it's funny, because, 2 of the 3 winners of the World Test Championship, New Zealand and South Africa, have been outside the big 3, and it's been, really galvanising for Test cricket in those countries. And that's kind of what we need more of, really. Perverse that South Africa can go for winning a Test Championship and not playing a single playing test all summer.
It's a shame, actually, because I actually really value the 3 test match series when you get good Test cricket. I feel like 15, 20 years ago, potentially a West Indies South Africa series would be more interesting than it is now. And it's a shame that you don't really get that. I remember Sri Lanka toured England 2014. That was a really good series.
That was great. That was only 2 matches, but it was a great one, yeah.
And you just think that was sort of, imagine if you had those strong teams and you sort of nurtured that, you'd have more of those going forward, but it's a shame that it didn't.
Yeah, but also more narrative, right? Because if whatever, South Africa have to beat West Indies 3-0 away to qualify for the Test Championship, and there's that really clear narrative that just kind of makes it a bit more interesting rather than the kind of percentage of points contested, which is a complete mess, really.
No, I completely agree. I'm shifting focus away onto the Ashes, but still to the book. I mean, obviously England Ashes are coming up. And one thing I think is really interesting about England is their wicket-keeping situation and how they pick wicket-keepers. And I guess in the book, I never really realised before reading it that this wicket-keeper debate between batsman-keeper versus normal keeper, I thought that was always a very modern thing. But then I didn't realise until reading the book this actually happened Duckworth Ames a long time ago, where there was always these debates versus should you pick your best keeper or should you pick a keeper batsman, I guess. What's the story for you? How do you think that evolved? And where do you see it in your mind? What's your overriding opinion on who the team should pick and under which scenarios?
Yeah, no, it is it's a really interesting old debate. And I found a story of 1929 on the boat to Australia. So like in 28 for the 29 Ashes, and basically correspondence saying, yeah, we all wish that, George Duckworth could bat like Les Ames, and Les Ames could keep like George Duckworth. So that is the classic debate. It's 100 years ago. It's actually starting even before that. But so at the time, the idea of pick your best keeper was kind of a myth, but you do have these, it wasn't always done, but you do have these guys who bat at 11. And the interesting thing is Australia are the most wedded to this of all. So Australia, until as late as mid-60s, they're picking a guy to keep who bats at number 11. They're picking, Wally Grout, people like that. Fantastic keepers average like 14, 15 over their careers. And it's just like pick your best keeper. So Australia actually, England are actually more pragmatic historically. Australia really do embrace the specialists. And until Rod Marsh makes his debut, late 1970s, Australian keepers averaged 17 throughout history, which is 5 fewer than everybody else. So Australia are actually, they're the worst for keeper batsmen, which is ironic because you then go to Gilchrist being from Australia, right? And so, I mean, some things have changed, right? The keeping has got easier a bit because keeping, gloves and helmets and stuff have made keeping a little bit easier. So that is certainly a factor. We've also had long-term reduction in Australia and the amount of spin being bowled, albeit in Asia, obviously Asia is spin is very dominant generally. And so where this all gets to, and we also have this kind of data question, we have this kind of black hole of you can't really measure catches. Well, you can measure catches taken and dropped, but you don't have the thing of that catch was very hard. That catch is very hard. That keeper has gone for it and he's shelled it, but he might take it half the time. And the guy who's not a good keeper, he can't even get his gloves on it at all. And yet, if one's taking half the catches, that's marked worse than one who's actually taking none of the catches, but is not actually dropping them technically. So there's this kind of data black hole a little bit. Clearly, like, in Asia, keepers are involved in a high proportion of dismissals, so therefore the case of picking your best keeper is stronger there. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I do think at times the balance has gone too far the other way. I think arguably 2023 Ashes actually, Johnny Bairstow averages 40, but he drops a lot of chances the first couple of tests, especially Edgbaston the first one, and it's got like his runs just his runs just kind of wipe out the one that the excess runs from catches he's dropped. They're not actually kind of adding net, right? But of course, there's also the value of the kind of symbolism and, a guy who can bat at 7 who can really take a game away, which you don't get necessarily from specialist keeper. So yeah, it's a perennial debate. It's a very interesting debate. I definitely understand the batting priority, but I think in general it might have gone a little too far. But I do think, I just think I think standards have just improved and it's got a little bit easier to keep. But yeah, we'll kind of see this debate continue. Obviously, we saw with India for a bit, which was very interesting when they had Saha and Pant. They would actually pick Pant for away test because it's again slightly easier to keep against pace bowling, and they picked Saha for home test. So that was quite interesting. They had a period where they had different keepers for different conditions for a few years.
Yeah, I think that sort of goes against the grain because people always think keep your keeper, play them everywhere, whereas
that's the thing as well. Yeah, because cricket
using the data.
I'm concerned about this. Yeah, that's right.
But I do see your point on the data gap, because you don't really have like sort of expected catches. Maybe one day we'll get that. And we'll say that cricket's gone woke.
Yeah. So you need to work out kind of, wingspan almost. And if it catches 1.8 meters away, this guy actually gets it even a third of the time, but he gets a hand in it all the time, and this guy doesn't get there at all, and that sort of thing. So it's a lot to work out. Obviously, you have buys and stuff and things. So yeah, there's lots of different factors.
I agree, but hopefully, do you think England will get it right this summer or this winter, this Australia summer with the team selection? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, my big thing is that England should not be wedded to the idea of picking a spinner, and I like the idea of actually picking an all-seam attack, because I think you look at overseas spinners as a century average 54 in Australia, excluding Indian spinners, that's 59. So it's just really, really tough. I think picking 4 specialist fast bowlers lets you actually use them in a better way, because the worst case if you have fewer, then you have to say bowl Mark Wood more chance of him getting injured. And if he's not injured, he's bowling longer spells. His impact's a bit diluted. So that I would look at that, and I'd say that's the best chance, and you don't need to kind of go through the motion of picking a spinner just because it's the done thing to do kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think they've actually made a good choice. When I first saw Jackson in the team, I didn't really understand it, but the more I read, I'm thinking they're always going to back Bashir probably for the personality point of view, and we back our players. But then I think if it doesn't go well, having that option of Jacks as someone you can throw a ball to and hold an end while your pacers rotate if you're playing 4-seamers and give you the batting is probably a good option. But I guess, do you think England will start with Bashir, or?
No, I'm not sure. I think there's definitely it's definitely possible. I mean, Rob Key said it's definitely possible they'll pick a team without a spinner in Perth. That'll be interesting to see.
Well, hopefully it goes well. And then obviously pace bowling is a huge thing. And in the book, I actually really enjoyed your article on fast bowling. And I did want to ask you, is something that I've sort of seen in the book is people always talk about, fast bowlers were, they're always bowling 90 miles an hour back in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
day. Were they actually bowling 90 miles an hour? Did you ever clarify, what speed was someone bowling in 1909? What speed was someone bowling in 1950? When did 85, 90 become common?
No, it's a great question, and you can like look at certain clues like where keepers are standing and stuff. My sense is that you have Jack Grary and Ted McDonald after World War II, 1920, 21, and they are seen as the quickest bowlers of all time, and it certainly as a pair. And I think they were probably high 70s, very early 80s. Have Harold Larwood borderline. I think he's probably 80, low 80s, maybe 80 towards 85. You have Frank Tyson, 54.5, maybe a little faster. I think you do get like Wes Hall's very quick as well, Charlie Griffith, but I think you get this big explosion. I think with Thompson and Lilly. But the interesting thing is you look at the footage and you talk to the players and stuff, and where the keepers are standing for Thompson compared to Lilly, they're standing so much further back for Thompson, and there's this kind of very flawed kind of battle of the pace bowlers in late 70s, and Thompson is basically seen as 100. And again, the speed might be wrong, but he's so much faster than the rest, which is interesting. So I think Thompson's, because his action is unique, it's not really replicated. So I think he's a complete outlier, and it's still possible he was up there with the fast bowlers of all time. It's definitely possible given his action. They said it was like picking up a snake out of the grass, the way he led back. So you didn't get any cues from his action. So it's definitely possible that in terms of your reaction time, he would be one of the shortest ever, because you compare with Brett Lee, say, Dale Steyn, like beautiful, fantastic bowlers, great actions, but quite pure actions. And by that, I mean, you can kind of see the ball for longer. So you do get a bit more sight. So even if it's really quick, you have a bit more sense of what's going on. Thompson, you didn't get that. So Thompson at his peak was incredibly, incredibly hard to face. What's definitely true is you get more bowlers bowling. There's definitely a high percentage of balls bowled at 87, 90 miles an hour now than before, right? Without question. But I still think it's possible that Thompson was, because his action was such an outlier, and he was so much faster than other guys who were clearly pretty quick, like Holding and Andrew Robertson and so on, that I think it's possible that he was actually bowling, mid-90s before his injuries.
It's good to know, because you never really, it's something you always wonder is like, at the beginning of Test cricket, are people actually telling the truth? Because people look at it through
there's definitely there's some embarrassment for sure.
And do you think when you spoke to players, did helmets make a big thing in terms of how quick things felt? Or is it just mainly your chance of getting dismissed was not wearing a helmet? Does wearing a helmet make it feel slower or make you feel more confident in batting?
Yeah, so helmets, they come in, and when World Series cricket's created in 77 with Kerry Packer, and basically he's obsessed with the gladiatorial aspect of very fast bowling to batsmen. And out of that is where you get the, you basically players are so worried about getting hurt, and rightly so, they're wearing helmets, and there's the concentration of fast bowlers is massive, and this is when there's a bit of a revolution in fitness and fielding, and that's also kind of so yeah, you can get hurt more easily, and so helmets are coming to protect players. Do they make? I think Ian Chappell thinks that more players get hit because of helmets, because it slightly damages your vision. Or I think at least initially for his generation of players who are used to, so make you more likely to be hit, but obviously less likely to be hit in a fatal way. But I think helmets do they have taken away a level of the dangers. I think the scariest time to be a test batsman was, mid-late 70s, in that period where you have basically fast bowling faster than it's ever been before, and you have not quite helmets yet. That was probably the scariest time to be a batsman against fast bowling.
So now they're all just soft, except for Ricky Ponting, because that's my favourite video of him getting cracked on the chin without a helmet. That's one of my favourite videos of all time. Yeah, I guess in terms of injuries then, of Pat Cummins is potentially injured for the first test match. You actually spoke to him in the book. He sort of talks about the injuries fast bowlers get. One thing I liked, it sort of explained, was the fact that, you hear Botham and all these bowlers talk about, back in my day, we used to bowl a lot so we didn't get injured. But then you actually look into the science of it and sort of how the bone density works. Maybe talk a bit to that in terms of, what actually goes through a fast bowler's body.
Yeah, that's right. There's this, Pat comes about the niggle worm, which is basically that one part of you hurts and you're kind of sleeping, and then you move over onto your shoulder or whatever, and then that hurts, and half an hour later you're moving to a different part to protect you, and the kind of point of most pain is always changing. And I think it's true. I mean, we forget such a basic thing, but I think you know, all fast bowlers are basically injured all of the time, and it's a case of managing that pain the whole time. Fast bowling is a very unnatural thing to do. A few people, Michael Holding, someone like him make it look natural, but for the vast, it's a really awkward thing to do. The strain on your shoulders, your arms, your knees, your legs, it's all massive basically. And so it is, and fast bowling also is, having looked at the history, there's no doubt that fast bowling is a single most important determinant in who wins test matches. On average over history, like by a country mile. And this is why Sachin Tendulkar, who I talked to for the book, and he only wins one of his first 44 test matches away from home. And the reason is he's a brilliant batsman. This is probably actually his peak years as a batsman, but the bowling is just not taking 20 wickets. So it doesn't matter what he's doing. He's not going to be winning matches. And so that's so fast bowling is so important. But yeah, how you manage this pain, and they've kind of bloody mindless as well. Talk with Dale Steyn, and he talks about how he wants to be fast at the end of the day than at the start of the day, and he would look at guys who lost pace and think, I don't want to be like him. And so this kind of this element of craziness to it. But of course, if it comes off, it's really, really special. And it's true that a lot of the most gripping patches in Test cricket history do involve a really, really fantastic fast bowler.
Yeah, Donald Atherton, for example. But I mean, I'm just conscious of time, and there's a few questions before we get to the end that I want to ask you sort of your thoughts on. So who actually is your favourite Test cricketer of all time? You obviously read all the whole history, and this can be personal or a story that makes you think they're your favourite or someone that you liked from your childhood. Who is your favourite Test cricketer of all time?
That's a great question. So yeah, I mean, my favourite Test innings, I think, is definitely Brian Lara's 153 against Australian Barbados in 1999, and I was able to talk to him about that. And there's obviously that was when I was a kid, and so to deconstruct that innings was amazing, and yeah, he would be up there. He is an unbelievable. I guess the kind of layers he has in terms of he could actually bat very, very normally, and then suddenly he's making a switch and he's scoring a strike rate of 100. Obviously the back cliff, the huge back cliff, very kind of charismatic. So there's a magic to him. So he'd be up there. He's a really, really unbelievable player. I mean, there's so many. Amr Lifton, I think, is the most valuable player of all time, and by that I mean the player who added most wins to their country they wouldn't otherwise have got. That's comfortably him. Sri Lanka only win 2 of the first 41 tests before his debut, and then under him they win more tests than they lose. And he is such a. I mean, also he's averaging 6 wickets a test. And wickets per test is something that I think is an underrated part of how we talk about cricket. But actually, wickets per test for bowlers, that is actually what is winning you matches. To get 6 on average is incredible, and also just a lovely, lovely man. I had a long chat with him for the book, so that was really, really cool as well. Yeah, I've got for the best test team of all time, but the favourite is, it probably would vary depending on the day of the week. And
there are any players who you think should have played more test cricket and that didn't? Or were there any players that you think were lost to test cricket that you wish you could have seen, or you wish that players played in this current generation, maybe from a previous generation?
Yeah, so in the history of test cricket is of players being excluded for, reasons that weren't to do with cricket. You look at Eddie Gilbert, 1930s, he bowled this, incredible over to Bradman, which is part of the inspiration for Bodyline. Bradman says it's the fastest over he's ever faced, i.e. faster than Larwood, but he, Aboriginal, and he's not picked by Australia, and basically for, racial reasons as far as we can tell. So yeah, I mean, he would be one of the, many examples of players who are not picked for the wrong reasons. In terms of players a lot of players should have played more who, their countries just didn't have test days or didn't play a lot of test cricket at the time. The other thing is the kind of club v country element where, players were lost, they're playing in Lancashire League cricket. So even like Leary Constantine, for example, 90s, he's missing games on tour of England because he's playing for Nelson at the same time and stuff, which kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about the way the money is divided. And that's actually it's a very old problem, and test cricket's never really grappled with this, which is why you talk about that competitive balance. Well, that could have been a lot better throughout history, but too often it's been, I think, one of the frustrations really is too often it's been the weaker teams who've actually found it harder to field their strongest possible 11s, which is from a competitive balance point of view, the wrong way around.
Completely agree. But Tim, thanks for all your time. I really appreciate you spending an hour chatting Test cricket. Maybe just tell everyone where they can buy your books, where they can find you, and if they want to sort of read anything more you do, what can they do?
Thanks very much. Here's a copy of the book. Yeah, you can check it out. It's available, good bookshops in UK, India, Australia, and, around, you can order it really around the world. So yeah, that's a great place. My Twitter's at Tim Wig on X. So yeah, and yeah, the Telegraph is where I do, I'm a staff there. So that's where my writing is. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed the chat.
And newly on Instagram as well, don't forget, Tim.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's very true.
But no, it's been great. And also, one story that we didn't get to cover, I did a video on Andy Flower, which is also basically taken from the book. So thanks for letting me copy that one. But that's a really interesting story.
Yeah,
I find
that's worth checking out as well. That's a funny story.
But yeah, definitely I'll put links to all of those below. But thanks for watching, and thanks to Tim.
Thanks so much.